For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Good morning, friendly hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Matt Modderno. He does a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. I know that he does a few different podcasts over there at the Believe Podcast Network. DMV Hoops is one of them. He's also a writer for Mid-Major Madness. I know that he is doing some great work with Bullets Forever. That's if you're an NBA fan, taking a look at the Washington Wizards and so much more. We're going to talk about what this offseason has brought for Maryland along with Villanova because of the entire Kevin Willard situation. And initially, we're going to be taking a look at what we've all seen in terms of mid-majors out there in the DMV area as well. So we've got a lot of fun that is going to be happening there, and he's going to be joining me in a few minutes. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys a roundup of the news and notes that we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM. Maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And everything today, it is brought to you by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they do an absolutely amazing job of making sure that you're able to access your funds 24/7, 365 for all of your gambling-related transactions, as this is not an account that runs on credit or anything like that. It's an account that allows you to make sure that every single one of your transactions is approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. You get a $1 match on your first $25 deposit. That is G-R-E-G. Now let's talk with our good friend Matt, who's over there at Mid-Major Madness and so much more. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Matt Modderno, and that last name is spelled M-O-D-D-E-R-N. And Matt, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here, Craig.
Absolutely. And Matt, you are out there in the DMV area. I know that you do a Maryland-centric podcast, so I have to ask you just what sort of an offseason this has been for Maryland, coming off of making the second week of the NCAA tournament, having that great run with the Crab Five, but now, as we know, it's going to be a little bit of a new-look team, and certainly a team that is probably going to have a little bit more depth, but at the same time might not have that same top-level talent that they had from a season ago as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been a roller coaster a couple of months here, or 2 months, I guess, with just the height of making a Sweet 16, then how it ended, and then immediately bouncing back with buzz. And I think people were largely kind of, lukewarm, I would say, on the hire maybe immediately because he wasn't this big splashy name. And then I think as he's built a roster out, a lot of people, myself included, have kind of come around to it for just that reason that you mentioned. Like he's had a lot of good, solid pieces and way more depth. And I think the Buzz Williams staple is, almost playing enough, good guys to like hockey sub in through 2 full, lineups here. So I think he's starting to put the blueprints together of what that'll look like. And they maybe need 1 or 2 more pieces. But anytime you throw in, a 5-star-ish recruit and a Darius Adams on there on top too, it definitely moves the needle enough for people. And I think got a few more people on board.
Yep, and certainly it was interesting, everything that was happening during the NCAA tournament with Kevin Willard as well. So that's a ball of wax that we'll dive in on in a few minutes. But with Maryland, I find it very striking what you've been able to see in the transfer portal, because there are a few guys that are going to be following Buzz Williams on over from Texas A&M. More of these are ancillary pieces, but someone like a Solomon Washington, Farrell Payne, those are rock solid guys. But I think that David Hewitt might be one of the biggest X factors that they are going to be bringing in, because I just don't understand why Kansas didn't give him more minutes. It felt like he was one of the few guys that actually cared for Kansas, shot it relatively well from 3-point range. I'm not sure how you take a look at the roster right now, but I think that that's a guy that could come in there right away. Maybe his defense might leave a little bit of something to be desired, but offensively, I think they can get an immediate boost out there in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, he'll absolutely score it from day one. Actually, his prep school coach is a really good friend of mine, so I got to see him before he even went the college route. So he actually ended up going to a junior college where he averaged, 20 points per game, and I want to say he led junior college in scoring as well before going to Northern Illinois and then continuing to keep scoring the ball at a high level. And like I said, at Kansas last year, it didn't necessarily materialize in the same way, and that just seemed like a roster where the pieces never really fit. So I don't know if that's totally an indictment on him and his ability to produce at a high level. in a Power 5 conference, or if it's just, hey, this never really worked. Because I think there were definitely times last year where Coit was, able to score at a high level and put up a lot of, points per 36 minutes. He just didn't get enough consistent minutes to really get a rhythm going. And when you're a guy that's used to scoring at that level, it's hard to play spot minutes, play a 3-minute stretch here and then not play for 10 more minutes and things like that and really keep it going. So I'm hopeful that just a more steady role and just understanding exactly what's expected of him as a secondary ball handler and also just a microwave scorer, ideally off the bench. Hopefully he's somebody that can kind of just come in and get back to doing what, he did 2 years ago.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's going to be very key for him. And no doubt, this is a roster that I think is really doing a good job. And I just really feel like the Big Ten in general this offseason has had a really good offseason, because I do think that with Buzz Williams, that was a good hire. Minnesota, what they've been able to do here in the offseason, hiring on Nico Medved. We know about the big two splash moves with Iowa and Indiana. I felt like those were good hires as well. And I'm not sure how you just take a look at the Big Ten in general, but I think all in all, out of all the conferences, they probably had the best offseason for any conference out there in the country.
Yeah, much to my chagrin here as a Maryland fan, I think the rest of the conference, just the bottom got better, and I think it's going to be, even more parity in the middle here. Like somebody like Indiana, I think you could say they were definitely underachieving given where their resources were, and I don't think that'll continue to be the case. And Iowa was a little down, like you mentioned, and you bring in a Bennett Sturts, Ben McCollum combo that's so battle tested together already, and I think it just sort of instantly moves the needle. Illinois will be back with their whole Vulcan lineup they've got going here. And then Michigan State is always kind of Michigan State. And I think they get a lot of good pieces back as well. Purdue returns probably two, fringe preseason All-American guys, if not two guaranteed ones. So there's a lot going on. USC's added a few more things in the portal, a pretty good amount of talent you've added to this UCLA roster with the Donovan Dent going somewhere like that. So it's just all around, it's just not going to be a nights off league, except maybe like Rutgers, and sorry for Steve Peichel, but I don't see much going on there so far.
Yeah, it's been a little bit rough for Rutgers, but perhaps getting back to the roots and not going the route of having two guys that are going to be lottery picks might actually be a good thing for them, because we saw that crash and burn, and typically when less is expected of Rutgers, they deliver more, and when more is expected, they typically deliver less, which I always find that to be interesting. As Matt Modderno, he does a tremendous job. Take a look at this great game of college basketball. One of the main guys over there at Mid-Major Madness is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I do have to bring that up because you are out there in the DMV area, and as we know, there's a lot of great mid-major schools out there. You're right there in really big Atlantic 10 country and so much more. And in terms of mid-major schools out there in your neck of the woods, how have you gauged your off seasons? Because I think that out of everything that has happened with these NIL collectives, what have you, the Atlantic 10 has actually been a lot of the beneficiaries of being able to add some of these top 150, top 200 freshmen that we typically don't see. And those schools out there in the Virginia area, like a George Mason, a George Washington that's out there in our nation's capital, I think that they've done a good job of being able to add some talent here in the off season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both schools have had a really good offseason so far, and that's good for me. Obviously, getting to see more local good basketball. I'm super excited for that. If you look at what George Mason's done, they just sort of doubled down on the identity that they've carved out for themselves under Tony Skinn. They've got sort of tough, gritty guys, positional size. Last year they had, a top 10 defense and adjusted efficiency there, so just really hard to do that at a mid-major program. They were pretty rough on the offensive end, so I think there's an opportunity here for a few more of these pieces that they're bringing in to pop on that side of the ball. You've got some really good two-way potential, bringing in a guy like Dola Adebayo from Mount St. Mary's, who also made a tournament and won a game in the tournament last year. They're going to be like a nightmare to score on, and I think that's a lot of fun to watch. And it's also the similar blueprint for what they're trying to do over at George Washington as well. It was pretty interesting to see Chris Caputo's team the first couple of years being a little bit more offensive minded, and I think that was largely due to the personnel inherited from the previous staff. And now he's kind of getting his guys. He was a defensive guru for Miami under Jim Larinaga, and now you're getting a little bit more of that. And they also really couldn't shoot the ball particularly well last year, but they were without an all-league level player in Garrett Johnson, who's a 6'8 sharpshooter. So that put them behind the eight ball. They get him back this year, and they bring back, the vast majority of their core. They'll have 4 or 5 starters back. So I think they're another team that they've got continuity. You want to get old and stay old. Well, last year they were pretty young, and I think that cost them, down the stretch in a couple close games, and there wasn't a lot of margin in the A10. So you lose 1 or 2 here or there from inexperience, just sort of put you behind the curve a little bit. But this year, those guys have grown together, and I think that's a really good recipe for success too.
I do think so as well. And I think that it is so interesting to take a look at that Atlantic 10 because I think you know this as well as I. The one seed never wins a conference tournament since what we saw this past season. But that is always wild and crazy. And just how do you gauge a conference where it always feels like the team that plays the best in non-conference portion of the season, they never end up winning the conference. And it always feels like the margins are so slim out there in the Atlantic 10 where 1 through 6 can be really separated by just a few mere bounces.
It was pretty funny at Atlantic 10 Media Day. Seth Greenberg from ESPN got up there and said, I think it's a guarantee that at least 5 teams from this tournament or from this conference will make the NCAA tournament. And everyone else that covers the league a little more intimately kind of looked at each other like, really? Which 5? Because it's another league where there's not much separation, but there was just a few kind of anchors dragging the conference down. So there weren't opportunities for them to just keep getting quality wins. And there were opportunities for them to get some really bad losses that kind of just sunk the chances of some of these teams. So someone like GW, they got behind early and it just was never going to, work out for them. And George Mason, they were great, but they only played VCU once at VCU and lost, it was a 1-possession game until the final media timeout. So that hurt them from a seeding perspective. And then that conference essentially came down to VCU and George Mason, the 2 best teams in the league throughout the year. And there really wasn't a whole lot that differentiated between the 2 teams, I don't think. And it just seemed like VCU had a slightly better night and pulled away there. But, this is one of those leagues where you can't have a particularly bad night against a bad team because your season could almost be over with just that one tough loss. So how do they get back to being a conference where you get 2, 3, maybe even 4 teams in is really going to be important for them. And I think they've made some good hires at the bottom of the league that maybe helps bring that, overall level. But we'll see. It should be fun to watch.
Yep, it certainly should be fun to watch as Matt Modderno, who does an excellent job covering this great game of college basketball, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And how about if we do backtrack a little bit, because we led off by talking about Maryland, and obviously the man that left Maryland is Kevin Willard. He's now going to be over at Villanova, and he brought with him a pair of guys that, let's call it what it is, didn't contribute much for Maryland this past season, and Braden Pierce along with Malachi Palmer. These were looked at as more guys of the future, guys that were going to be able to contribute in a year or two. But how do you take a look at the outlook of Villanova now? Because Kevin Willard very much up close in person from the last few seasons, and I think that he very much proved his worth over at Maryland. But that said, I think that there's a lot of people that they still have a few questions around him based on just the way that he has gone about his entire coaching career, going back to when he was over at Seton Hall.
That didn't end particularly well, that tenure. That left a little bit of a sour taste in people's mouth up at Seton Hall. And I think a lot of that's happening again this year. And you're seeing them not be overly successful in the transfer portal. And I think that's a lingering effect from just the way that tenure at Maryland ended. There's a little bit of a stench following him around. I think right now you've got their point guard from last season at Maryland, Jacoby Gillespie, his dad, making some comments about how Willard, sort of intentionally misled everybody. And they were all under the impression up until going into that last game against Florida that he would be back next year. And there was a home for them to all come back to as well if they wanted to do that. Now, there were also reports as early as January that Tennessee was going to offer a bag to Jacoby Gillespie to move there. But I think he would have at least considered staying home given how close he was. Stay home at Maryland. Sorry, not home for him from Tennessee, but stay at Maryland because he and Rodney Rice were just that close. But obviously it didn't work out that way. And then you've got Atan Thomas, who played locally for our Washington Wizards, but was a Syracuse standout back in the day. His son, Malcolm Thomas, played here at DeMatha, one of the best high school programs, historically in the country. And Kevin Willard didn't really recruit him all that hard while he was at Maryland. And he was a freshman at Villanova this year, didn't play a whole lot. And I guess Tan and Malcolm tried to give Kevin Willard the benefit of the doubt. And Tan came out and said after, hey, this guy has a reputation of not being particularly, trustworthy. We try to give him the benefit of the doubt. And ultimately he earned that reputation. So I think that's really going to be hard for someone like Kevin Willard to shake off. Now, ultimately, if you have enough money and enough resources, you'll get some people. So he gets a guard from Sidwell Friends here at Caden Lewis, who's a player I really like, one of their big marquee signings. But otherwise, there's just not a whole lot to move the needle. And he might really be relying on 2, 3.5, 4-star guards and Caden Lewis and Chris Jeffrey in year one and have to try to build the old-fashioned way and take this as a little bit of a building year, and hopefully he can retain a lot of those guys next year and hit the portal a little harder. So not the ideal start you want if you're Villanova, to go all in on this guy and then see him whiff routinely, and the only guys he brings with him are are guys that didn't really play, if at all. And I do like Braden Pierce. He's just unfortunately been injured for most of the last 2 seasons. So one red shirt, one medical red shirt, but he's got a lot of basketball left ahead of him, I think.
Yep, I do think so as well, and I think that is going to be fun to see what they're going to be able to do this season out there in the Big East. A Big East that, I was talking about it. I felt like the Big Ten had the best offseason of any conference. I feel like the Big East has had a relatively good offseason as well with everything that we've seen them be able to bring in the transfer portal. UConn looks like they're going to be able to get back to prominence. St. John's is just doing St. John's things, and what I think is very interesting about the Big East is that it feels like the teams that were more towards the bottom of the conference a few seasons ago, like DePaul, like Georgetown, they're finally starting to be able to give you a little bit of something. And I think that the overall competitiveness of the conference just feels a little bit better, even though other than perhaps UConn and perhaps St. John's, you don't necessarily have those top flight teams.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conference that should get better given how the revenue sharing thing has worked out, where a league that doesn't have football has a lot more resources to dedicate toward their main sport in basketball. So I think you're seeing programs like St. John's and UConn take advantage of that right now. They're probably both preseason top 5-ish level teams, and they've spent their budgets wisely on just adding talent. And you mentioned someone like Georgetown. They lose a few key guys here or there. Micah Peavy was huge for them last year. Thomas Sorber was huge for them last year. But they're bringing in talent, and they're betting on a couple local guys taking a jump in Deshaun Harris-Smith that was at Maryland previously, and one of his high school teammates, Isaiah Abraham, that's coming in from UConn that didn't actually play much, last year. So I think this is an opportunity for those guys to hopefully take a jump, and they're going to get lots of minutes, and then they're going to bank on some internal development from a player like Caleb Williams, who played a decent amount as a freshman, and it's more of a connective piece, but I think has, another gear he could take it to. So they're going to be better, like you said. There are some schools I haven't really seen a whole lot of movement for, like a Providence, and there's still some questions for me, but I do think the top part of this league is going to be pretty darn good again.
Yep, I think so as well. And Matt, we'll put the ball in your court here. This is a little bit of dealer's choice here. Just in everything that you've seen this offseason, it could be a team out there in your portion of the country. It could be a team out there out west, Midwest, what have you. Just everything that you've seen this offseason. Who's a team or two that you just take a look at, you feel like they've done a great job this offseason, and they're not quite getting the love and respect that they deserve?
And we talked about them already with George Washington. Like I said, they were a handful of possessions away from being able to compete for the league last year. And it's just so hard right now for a mid-major school to bring back a lot of guys and fend off people that probably had a decent amount of suitors, but they kept a really good freshman point guard in Christian Jones. Now, he can't really shoot at the moment, but if the shooting ever comes around, he's a Power 5 guard. He's got good size. He's really athletic, good decision maker as a freshman, and just really physical and good at getting to the basket. And you bring a shooter in Trey Autry back. You keep a really good all-league level center in Rafael Castro. Like, they're going to be good. And I don't think any of the early sort of A10 publications are talking about them maybe as good as I think they're going to be. And I've got a decent track record on this one. I think I had George Mason being a top 2 or 3 team last year, and ultimately, they tied for a share of that league. So I could see a similar jump from GW. Another school locally here is American. They were really senior dominated last year. Their top 5 guys were all seniors or super seniors, with the exception of one player in Greg Jones, who is back. He did enter the portal briefly and return, but this is a guy that could be an all Patriot League caliber player next year and potential Patriot League Player of the Year contender, down the road here. He'll enter his junior year. They should get a big jump from a guy like Matt Mayock. And then they've got 6 freshmen coming in. This is not like a league that gets a lot of transfers in the Patriot League, so they've got to build from the ground up here, essentially. So they might be a year away, but I think they're going to be a lot more competitive than people realize. It's hard to make 2 back-to-back Patriot League championships and get in the tournament that way, given that they will be so reliant on some of these freshmen to add their depth. But it's a really talented freshman class. And the way they want to play, I think having a lot of depth is going to be huge for them, especially if any of those freshmen pop and they get a jump from a point guard like Wyatt Nasadis or one of their forwards and Julian Iturbe. Like, they should make a little bit of noise here locally, I think.
Yep, and then the guys out there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, that they're going to be back in full force as They always do a great job in Bucknell and Colgate. They've been running the conference over the last few seasons, but I do think that it is going to be very interesting to see what we get out there in the Patriot League. Always one of my favorite conferences to take a look at. And Matt, you're doing a tremendous job gauging so many different things. You're over there at Mid-Major Madness. I know you're doing the Fear the Terp podcast and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Greg. If just anybody wants to learn about some of the local teams here, get up to speed, we're keeping it rolling with just content throughout the summer here. A lot of player interviews. A lot of the teams we've just mentioned already are ones we cover pretty extensively over here. So just let me know if there's anybody you want to hear from or hear more about. We'll point you in the right direction. It's at Matt Modderno, MattModderno on Twitter, and you can kind of find all the stuff I'm working on from right there.
Absolutely. And Matt, I know, does some great work on the Washington Wizards front as well. He's doing better work than the Washington Wizards themselves are, because that's been rough the last few seasons, but he's doing a great job of covering the team as well. And Matt, he is a lover of hoops. He does a great job of being able to gauge it all. So great to be able to get him aboard. Big thanks to Matt for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Was great to be able to get Matt Modderno aboard. He does such a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. I know that he's out there in the DMV area doing a few different podcasts and is doing a sensational job over at Mid-Major Madness. So a big thanks to Matt for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Transfer portal starting to wind down a little bit more as more of these teams become a little bit more set with these guys that they've got. But I love this one. Todd Brogna. He last season was over at Stone Hill. 6'7", was able to supply the team with 12.5 points, 6.8 rebounds per contest, right around about a block per game as well. He's heading on over to Merrimack. I think that he's actually going to fit into this Merrimack style very, very well. Not a guy that's necessarily a heat-seeking missile with regards to generating turnovers, but the one issue that you always have with Merrimack year in and year out is that this team has a little bit of a difficult time in terms of their rebounding. He should be able to help out with that quite a bit. And he's a very versatile big man. At 6'7" last year, was able to give the team 2.2 steals per contest, shot 39.7% from three-point range. And though he never really showed the ability to be able to generate turnovers or anything like that, he was in a system in which really didn't allow him to be able to do so. So in this system, just with the way that Joe Gallo is able to coach in general, I think that this is going to be a really big add for them. And I think that this is very interesting. Malik Thomas has indeed received a waiver from the NCAA for another season of eligibility. Last year, he was over at the Dons of San Francisco, 19.9 points per contest, shot 39% from three-point range, which means that we in all likelihood are going to see more and more of these guys that were fishing for eligibility actually reel in that eligibility. So that's some good, clean family fun right there. So he is now out there in the transfer portal, and now he's a guy that you're able to claim if you so choose. This is nothing more than a depth piece, as you've got Efe Uchukwu. He was over at Rice last season, 6'11" junior, average 3.5 minutes per game, and he's going to Duke. If he's seeing meaningful minutes for Duke, things have went wrong. I don't need to give you much else here. Congratulations to him. I am sure that he is going to be a walk-on here. Vinay Slosham. He last season was over at Florida National. He was a pretty rock-solid big man. He was able to give the team just below 2 blocks per contest, 10.5 points per game, 5 rebounds, limited in terms of his offensive ability, but at 6'11", should be able to give this TCU team some relatively solid defense. Again, I don't think that he's going to be any sort of like a starter or a dynamo for the TCU team, but with losing Ernest Uday in the offseason, and for TCU, this team is always at their best when they're rough and tumble on the defensive side of things. They do need that good big man down low like they had for Eddie Lampkin for quite a few years, but you were able to get out of Uday for quite a while as well. This is going to be able to help them out. And for TCU, they've revamped a little bit here in the transfer portal, bringing in Brock Harding from Iowa. I thought was very good, and They're also going to be bringing in Jaden Pierre to help out that backcourt. They didn't really address anything down low. This is going to be their first add down low, so probably going to need to add another forward or two, but this is very much a step in the right direction. I think that this is a solid add as well. Enoch Kalambe, he was over at Western Kentucky this last season. Part-time starter. He was averaging in the neighborhood about 8 points, 4 boards per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Campbell, and for Campbell, they lose their coach in the offseason. They have a lot of moving pieces in general that they need to parse through, but all of a sudden here in the last, we're going to call it about 72 or so hours, they've been able to find a few guys, and now I really think that they're starting to be able to build northward for this new coaching regime in general. As out there in the Coastal Conference, we have seen a lot of teams do a very good job of being able to add some talent. UNC Wilmington very much coming to mind, and Campbell, in my opinion, was a little bit of a surprise this past offseason, but they were able to add Chris Fields, who was a rock-solid big man over at Norfolk State at 6'7". A little bit ago, you got Jeremiah Johnson, a former top 250 recruit of UMass, coming in. Quentin Mincy, a double-figure scorer over at Campbell, and now you add in there a guy in Cullen Bay, who, again, he's not necessarily going to light you up from three-point range or anything like that, but at 6'6", relatively good versatility. He's able to do a little bit of this and that. Him coming into this program, I think, is massive. So a shout-out to Campbell and what they've been able to do over the last, we're going to call it about 72 or so hours. This is a pretty solid add as well to Javis Miller. He was a really good, sharp three-point shooter over for North Dakota State this last year. 10.5 points per contest. Primarily was coming in as a sixth man. Shot about 36.5% from three-point range. He is going to be going on over to New Mexico, and I do think that Eric Olin is really getting it right here at New Mexico right now. For Eric Olin, he comes over after he was so good over at UC San Diego, transitioning that team from Division II to Division I, getting them to the NCAA tournament this past season. Now, for Miller, he was a part of a defense that wasn't great, to say the least, over at North Dakota State. They're not necessarily ever lauded for their defense, but that said, I think that with the way that Olin is able to coach, he's going to be able to get this guy to fire on all cylinders, and this has been a really good haul for New Mexico. They bring in Dayton Albury, who 2 seasons ago, when he was over at Queens NC, was a nice double-figure scorer. Chris Howell, he was going to be following Olin on over from UC San Diego. They've got a pair of guys from USC, and Kevin Patton and Khalil Patton, the brothers. JT Rock, a 7-footer, is coming in from Iowa State. This team has done a really good job of mixing and matching. They're going to have some good stretchability. They're going to have some good versatility, and bringing in a nice sharpshooter like Miller, that's going to be able to fit this system very well. Daniel Agbaniwe, he was over at Tennessee Tech last season, top rebounder for them, 10 points, 6.5 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to St. Bonaventure. Now, for St. Bonaventure, for the love of Pete, can they go into their bench this year? Like, my gosh. They bring in like 10 guys via the transfer portal every single year, and right now they're up to 5. They're bringing in Frank Mitchell, rock-solid rebounder 2 seasons ago over at Kenosha. Spent last year over at Minnesota. Braden Jackson, I don't think that he's going to do a ton for the team, but Amari Marshall, double-figure scorer over at Albany. Daryl Simmons, double-figure scorer over at Gardner-Webb. Now you're bringing in Agbaniwe, 10 points, 6.5 boards over at Tennessee Tech. Are they finally going to be able to decide, all right, we are going to go into our bench. We're going to have a 7-man rotation, and we're going to make sure that not every single starter is playing 40 minutes and is running into the ground, because we see it with this team time and time again. Typically, they get off to a really nice against the spread record to begin the season, then as they get tired, things go straight down the toilet bowl for them. So we shall see on that front, but I do think that that's a relatively solid add. And again, please, St. Bonaventure, add a few more guys so that way you're able to have a little bit of a bench. James Scott, he was rock solid over at Louisville this last season. 6'11", a little bit of a combo player who was giving the team 7.6 boards per contest, shot north of 75% from the floor. He's decided that he's going to be going to Ole Miss. I felt like this was a very necessary add for Ole Miss, because with Ole Miss, they were doing so many things well. The one thing that they were really lacking, though, was any sort of rebounding, and now being able to bring him in along Corey Chess, who comes on over from LSU, that should be able to address that, and he's going to be paired up with Corin Johnson as well. He's also going to be coming in from Louisville. They're taking a shot on AJ Storr, which I still have my question marks with AJ Storr. He just feels like he's a little bit of a chucker, was never even necessarily too efficient when he was over with the Wisconsin Badgers, but Chris Beard knows what the heck he's doing as a coach. Got Ole Miss to the Sweet 16 last season, even with an undersized team, so I do think that there's a lot of upside with that move. You've got John Stewart, who last season was over at Ohio State. He's heading on over to Oregon after last season, 5.5 points, 5.5 boards, a block per contest, a guy that is a former top 50 recruit, began his career over at Duke, didn't see a lot of footing there, but for Oregon, they're in quite a bit of transition, as last season they were really relying upon Nate Biddle and his versatility, and Stewart Stewart is never going to be that guy. This guy is not going to be able to give you a lot in terms of like 3-point shooting or anything like that, but a rock-solid rim protector. He's a better defender than, shall we say, someone like a Supreme Cook was a season ago for this team as well. So him being able to come into this program, being able to give this team a little bit of rough and tumble down low, I think that that's going to be good for them. And then you've also got Florida International getting on the board. Zwade Jackson, he was really good at the Division II level 2 seasons ago over at West Georgia before they made that transition up to the Division I level, and this past season showed his worth over at New Mexico State. 10.5 points, right around about 3 assists per game, shot 38% from 3-point range. He goes to Florida International, and for Florida International over the last few seasons, they have had that one dominant player that has been able to completely transform the offense, and I would not doubt it if they build their entire offense around this guy, and they should be building their entire offense around this guy, because last year it was Jaden Brewer who was trying to come in there, hold down the fort for them. It was a little bit hit or miss with that regard, but for Florida International, they haven't gotten onto the board too much with a ton of transfers. The only other guy is Corey Stevenson, who he was a 6'6" combo player that I actually liked over at Cal State Bakersfield, but I do think that this is a really good ad for them, and I do think that he's going to be Mr. Do-It-All. I think that he's going to be able to elevate both that offense and that defense. Josh Ojawana, he was over at Baylor this last season. He has decided that he's going to be going to Ohio State. So Ohio State loses Sean Stewart, but they pick up Ojawana. He was a very good, rock-solid player down low. About 6.5 rebounds, 7.5 points per game. He was missing for the final 10 or so games of the season last year for Baylor due to injury, but someone who shot north of 70% from the floor last season. He's really good at being able to get second and third chance opportunities, so I very much like this ad for them, and I do think that that one is very rock-solid moving forward. This one I think is a good one as well. Grant Grosnick, he was over at Detroit Mercy this last season. He averaged 8.5 points per contest, shot over 40% from 3-point range. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Long Beach State. For Long Beach State, they do lose Devin Askew via the transfer portal, and for Long Beach State, you can tell that season number 1 was not necessarily so savory moving on from Dan Monson. I do think, though, that season number 2 is very much on the up and up as of right now. For Long Beach State, they just had such a tough time taking care of the ball, and for Detroit, they were a relatively okay offense out there in the Horizon League, so he's got some good, shall we say, pedigree there. They're also bringing in Shaquille Bender, who's going to be able to help, be able to dole out the ball as well. Demary Johnson Jr., who comes on over from San Diego State as the coach Chris Hacker. He actually was an assistant over at San Diego State. That's a rock-solid ad as well. So I really do like what this Long Beach State team is adding via the transfer portal, and I do think that they're forming themselves a good backcourt that is going to be much more efficient this season. You've also got Florida International bringing in Michael Kelvin as well. He was over at Oklahoma State. Now, this is someone that was not able to see the floor over at Oklahoma State this last season. Last we saw him, he was playing over at Queen's University in Ontario, Canada, so they are going a little bit Canadian here, and I do think that for Michael Kelvin, it's going to be very interesting to see how that game is able to translate, because he was able to get all those reps in those Oklahoma State practices and everything like that, but we have not really seen him over at the Division I level, so it is going to be a very interesting case study, because we've seen some of these guys like Ty Dunn, who came on over when he was in the country of Canada, and then he was able to make that transition very, very well. If you take a look at what he was able to do last for our good friend and Mr. Kelvin, he was averaging right in that neighborhood about 11 points per contest in the country of Canada. So, I mean, this is a little bit of a TBD in my opinion, but I think that this is a swing that is very much worth taking for Florida National. Again, I do think that they're going to be running much more of the offense through the main man that they picked up in Zwade Jackson, but I still do like that ad for them. Chucks Isumsa, he was over at Fresno State this last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to Southern Utah. He was able to get out there on the floor for IU Indy a few seasons ago, spent a year at the non-Division I level, was supposed to be a big-time guy for Fresno State, but he only appeared in a few games for them. He's been dealing with injuries over the last few seasons, and last we saw Isumsa, he was averaging right in that neighborhood for IU Indianapolis of right in that neighborhood about 5.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per contest. Not a guy that's going to stretch the floor and pop it from 3-point range or anything like that, but at 6'10", should be able to add some size to a Southern Utah team that's been absolutely awful on the glass last few seasons, so that's going to be able to help them out. Sebastian Aikens, he was over at Denver last season. He was the Summit League Rookie of the Year, averaging 12.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range, just under 3 assists per game. He has decided that he's going to go to Wake Forest. Now, if he's going to be running the point for Wake Forest, I think that they're doomed for another rough season, because we saw what happened even when they lost Kevin Boopy Miller. That said, for Wake Forest, I do think that this is a solid add. I do think that they've done a much better job here in the offseason. They're going to need Nate Calmezzi to be a little bit more efficient with the ball than he was over at Washington State this last season, but he's going to be able to help out in the backcourt. They pick up Cooper Schwieger from Valparaiso, should be able to give them some rebounding. And then you've got a guy, Miles Colvin, who at 6'5", can really pop it and lock it from three-point range. They brought in Makai Mason, who was over at Washington as well. So they've done a really good job of revamping the backcourt after they realized last season, man, things were very much less than savory for them, and this is a nice depth piece for them. Again, if you're seeing Sebastian Aikens being that main scorer for them, I think that you've found yourself in a little bit of a rough situation / a main facilitator, but if he's a little bit more of a come off the bench, give you a little bit of energy sort of guy, I think that they're going to be just fine. BYU, it's a case where the rich just keep getting richer. As Nate Pickens, he's probably not going to be a starter for this team, and if he is, something has went horribly wrong, but average 10 points, 3.5 boards per contest over at UC Riverside, shot 39% from three-point. He has decided that he is going to be going to BYU, and for this BYU team, that NIL collective has brought in pretty much the best recruiting class in all of college basketball, and they need to add a little bit more depth because they did put a lot of their shekels in the middle with the fact that they brought in Robert Wright III and they paid him all that money. They are adding in there some of these mid-major guys, like Kennard Davis comes over from Southern Illinois, Nate Pickens, Tyler Miras, and I do think that when you have a freshman class like BYU has coming in, you need a little bit of experience, you need a little bit of depth, and they've done a good job of being able to address that. So kudos to them, and that's a good pickup for them. And I also think that this is a solid pickup as well. Javon Hanna, he's decided that he's going to be going to Old San Jose State. Last season, he was over at Western Michigan, averaged about 12 points, a little bit over a steal per contest. Now, for Javon Hanna, has been a guy that's always been a little bit hit or miss with regards to his outside shot, in Western Michigan in general. They were just rough with their three-point shooting, but he should be able to fit a system in San Jose State that they play at a relatively similar tempo. I always have loved the job that Tim Miles has been able to do as a coach, and I think that he's done a pretty good job over the last few seasons over at San Jose State. I think that this is another relatively solid add for them, and I do think that this is a very good system fit in general for a San Jose State team that I would like to see them add a few more pieces here in the offseason. Then this is a team that is also going to be retooling Niagara. They're bringing in Julian Brown. He was over at Sam Amford this last season, shot 35% from three-point range, 5 points per contest, was really lost in the shadow of a few of these other guys, but he's returning to the northeast part of the country where 2 seasons ago he was more of a 10-point per game scorer over at Wagner, so has shown the ability to play in a little bit of a slower system and be able to show the ability to play some good defense. I think that this is a really nice add for Niagara, as Niagara is a team that is very much built around their three-point shooting. They're built around a little bit more of a slow and controlled style, so having a guy that's played a little bit of both extremes, I think is going to be very good for them, because with Niagara, it feels like they've been a little bit of a one-trick pony for the last few seasons. Being able to get a little bit more versatility and being able to get a guy that can transition, I think is very good for a bunch that here in the offseason, it was a little bit slow going for them. This is really the first big-time ad that they've gotten, but I do think that the best is yet to come for them, and it's always great to have you aboard on this podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, as I'm with you guys every single day, looking at all that we're getting in the offseason to be able to make this the greatest season ever here in the 2025-26 college basketball season. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_41. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Matt Modderno, does great work over at Big Major Madness, does a great job with the DMV Hoops Podcast as well. You join me in the last section, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.